On December 27, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media now. Here's your host, Donal Ware.
This is the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Tuesday, September 5th. I'm Donal Ware. Of course, yesterday we had a chance to kind of look at the scoreboard. I want to get a little bit more in depth in terms of week one in HBCU football in our Takeaway Tuesday segment. Hope you guys had a phenomenal, not only weekend, but a phenomenal Labor Day. And we call it Labor Day, but it seems like that's all I did on Labor Day was labor, okay? We got this brisket kind of going at the house. That took some work, had a bunch of stuff to do with box to row, a bunch of other stuff that really needed to be done. I must have worked an 8-hour day on a holiday, but that's what we do here at Box to Row, because we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need, that you want, and that what we do here is entertaining, is knowledgeable for you, entertaining, and enjoying to you. So some of the takeaways from Tuesday, and before I even get to the takeaways, I've got to get to the HBCU coaches and media polls, as those were released, as a matter of fact, on yesterday. As I pull them up here, I mean, no surprise when you think about the number one team, North Carolina Central, is number one in both the coaches and media polls. Now, it wasn't a unanimous number one. Florida A&M received some votes, rightfully so, because if you look at the preseason poll, it wasn't like, or the preseason polls, the Eagles weren't number one or weren't a unanimous number one in either poll. So in the coaches poll, North Carolina Central received 18 of 20 first-place votes. Florida A&M received the other two, number two. Prairie A&M, number 3. Alabama State, number 4. Jackson State, number 5. 6 through 10 looks like this. Howard, North Carolina A&T, Morgan State making an entrance in the coaches poll, Hampton and Southern. In the media poll, North Carolina Central, Florida A&M, Benedict at number 3, followed by Jackson State at number 4 and Alabama State at number 5. 6 through 10, Virginia Union, Prairie View A&M, Morgan State, Howard, and North Carolina A&T round out the top 10. Your players of the week, Morgan State linebacker Eric Hunter had 11 tackles in the victory over Richmond. He also had a tackle and a half for loss and a tackle and a sack and a half in the ball game. The sack, he had a sack in the fourth quarter that was absolutely huge. As a matter of fact, 10-10 game, he had a sack fumble recovered by Morgan State deep in Richmond territory. I think it was the next play, Morgan State got a 10-yard touchdown run to go ahead in 17-10, which ended up being the final score. But that was a huge play in the game. Eric Hunter, the linebacker for Morgan State. And then the other HBCU National Player of the Week, Tyrell Jackson, the quarterback from Johnson C. Smith. The Golden Bulls had a big win over West Virginia Wesleyan. It was a blowout, as a matter of fact, 49-6. And Jackson, 19 of 28, 229 yards, threw 4 touchdowns, didn't throw any interceptions in that victory by Johnson C. Smith. So that's a huge win for the Golden Bulls to kind of start this season off and try to get the season off on the right foot. So some of my takeaways, I think the number one takeaway had to be Morgan. It was Morgan State's victory over Richmond. It was a big-time win for Morgan. You think about Richmond's in the CAA, a top 25 team. Morgan State had been down. You look at the 2014 season for Morgan State. I think it was a 6-5 season. It was a 5-way tie in the MEAC that year. And Morgan State held the tiebreakers, thus went to the FCS playoffs. Less that season, on the Donal Hill Ely, there may have been a couple of 6-5 seasons, a 6-6 season, if my memory serves me correctly, but not a whole lot of success before Donal Hill Ely, maybe for 40 years. So to get a victory like that by Morgan State, I think is big. Damon Wilson doing a tremendous job as the head coach, changing the culture there in Baltimore and at Morgan State, much like he did at Bowie State, with all of the success that Bowie State was able to have with him as the head coach. So that was my number one takeaway. Number two, some big wins. I mean, there were some big wins in HBCU football. Bowie State's and some upsets. Bowie State's win over Delaware State. I'm not even sure if I classify that as an upset. Lee Hall's going to try to have to find his footing. I think he'll do, he'll be successful. Speaking of Morgan State, when Morgan State ended up getting a share of that title in 2014, Lee Hall was the head football coach. I have no doubt he'll find his footing, but I think Delaware State has had some players to lead the program, so it's going to take a little bit of a building. And I think Bowie State had a bit of a down season in Kyle Jackson's first year, so they're looking to turn around. That's a big win for Bowie State. Then Virginia State's win over Norfolk State. We talked about this yesterday, the manner really in which Virginia State won that football game, really was able to eke it out in an old CIAA matchup, right? So big win for Virginia State. Then you had some close games, some almost games. Elizabeth City State had an opportunity against Catawba, couldn't quite get it done. We talked about that yesterday. West Virginia State fell to within 2 points, losing 37-35 to Morehead State, playing up. And then Fayetteville State loses on a field goal, a last-second field goal to UNC Pembroke. But those are some programs I think that are going to compete. Maybe Elizabeth City State turns the corner a little bit on this year. And then you talk about some other nice wins. Alabama State over Southern is a good win. I didn't see the game, but I had a chance to look at those stats. And Alabama State, I mean, that was a defensive struggle. From the third quarter on, the score remained the same, and Alabama State was able to hold on. And then Prairie View A&M getting off on the right foot with an overtime victory on a field goal over Texas Southern. So that was a big victory for Prairie View A&M. And not only that, it was a Southwest, it was a SWAC Western Division game as well. So that made it an even bigger victory because you're now one up in the SWAC and the division if you're Prairie View A&M. Another takeaway, Florida A&M finally getting over the hump. Big win over Jackson State. Jeremy Musa was solid. It's like 12 of, 22 or something like that, 100 in excess of 150 some yards. He had 2 touchdowns, did not turn the ball over. Florida A&M was able to run the football for 207 yards. Now, that's not a huge surprise because South Carolina State, the previous week in the MEAC SWAC Challenge, had some success in running the football on Jackson State. And so you have a good quarterback in Jeremy Musa, and then that defense by Florida A&M, Isaiah Major, and the rest of the crew for the Rattlers absolutely did the job on Jason Brown and that Jackson State offense. So that's another one of my takeaways from the week. And then, I thought even though there was some good offense, okay, there was some solid offense, but there was some offense that wasn't so good. I talked about, Bethune-Cookman less than 100 total yards in the loss to Memphis. Some other programs didn't really have a lot of great offense. You had the quarterback position this week. What one was interesting. This particular week one isn't like some of the other week ones we would have seen in the past. You had a lot of big wins. You had some wins over non-HBCU teams, which has been a point of contingency. Yes, you'd had some losses, but you had, some wins as well. You had some solid quarterback play. I mentioned Jackson as one of the players of the week. And then Jaquay Hart, the quarterback for Bluefield State in his very first game, 17 of 32, 218 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. Is a true freshman, okay, playing in his very first game. So you had some of those kind of games. I thought that Davius Richard was solid enough against Winston-Salem State. I think that the Eagles are going to have to get that offensive line together coming into the game against A&T on Saturday, but I thought he did a well enough job. But then you had some not so great offense and some not so great quarterback play as well in week one of HBCU football. So that was another one of my takeaways. My final takeaway is this. I know a lot of people have been watching, Colorado to see what Deion Sanders was going to do as the head coach at Colorado. Now, I know there was maybe certainly at Jackson State, and then maybe in the HBCU world, maybe some hurt feelings by those at Jackson State. Those, and I'm not saying everyone at Jackson State, some of those in the HBCU world. I think to think that Deion Sanders was going to stay at Jackson State for a long period of time was not realistic. As I wrote about, I thought it was the right move for him to move on to Colorado. And I know a lot of people, not just in HBCU, but people generally speaking, had their eyes on that football game against TCU. That was a huge win for Colorado. As Deion Sanders appropriately stated when correcting a reporter earlier in the week, he said, I am an HBCU grad, and he is, and that's a fact. He is an HBCU grad. Big win. Shedeur Sanders was phenomenal. Like, I'm going to tell you, he showed me something. I knew Shedeur Sanders could play. I think we all knew he could play. Okay. I think the question was, what would he do against FBS competition week in and week out? Okay. Now, you can talk about whether TCU plays defense or not perennially. We can talk about all that, but the numbers don't lie. Completed 38 of 47 passes, 510 yards, 4 touchdowns, did not throw a single interception in that football game. And to me, what it said to me is this, and we watch that young man improve every year. 2021, solid freshman year. He took it up another notch in 2022 to the point, I think at some point he had thrown like 20 some odd touchdowns and no interceptions. We know even he was in the 70th percentile in terms of completion percentage. So we know he could play, but he was going to have to take his preparation to another level in playing at Colorado, because week in and week out, you're playing FBS opponents. And so I think his preparation coming into this 2023 season was excellent, and that enabled him to have an outstanding football game. Travis Hunter, former Jackson State player, could play either way. He had an interception. He also had 11 receptions, 419 yards in this football game as well. And I was also pleased to see the running of Savion Wilkerson. Now, remember, he played at Jackson State last year, but previous to that, he played at Delaware State. So you've got HBCU footprint all over Colorado right now. So, listen, I wasn't the biggest Deion Sanders fan, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and try to say like I'm on the bandwagon. It's just the fact of the matter is, it's good to see when HBCU players go to if that's what they choose to do, go to the next level and perform. Those 3 young men in particular did, and then Deion Sanders as the head coach did as Well, I wanted to shout out, Deion Sanders and those that played it, his two sons, Shiloh Shador, Travis Hunter, Wilkerson, that all played at Jackson State and made an impact in that victory by Colorado over TCU. So those are my thoughts for today's HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can always hit us up on Twitter at Box2Row, BOXTOROW. Follow us while you're there. You can also, if you're watching this on the Box2Row YouTube channel, you can always comment there as well. And don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can watch on the Box2Row YouTube channel, as well as listen or download the podcast on box2row.com, as well as iHeartMedia.com. Hope you enjoy. Talk with you tomorrow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at box2row.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box2Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box2Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.